Congressman McEwen, you've been in Washington quite a while. You were on the House Intelligence Committee. We've got a big report coming out from the Mueller report. Tell us about it.
Well, it's great to be with you. Let me just remind about intelligence service. You cannot talk about what goes on in intelligence. It's by nature, it's secret. So it's set off by itself. And in 1975, people of America said, I'm not so sure that's good. Somebody ought to be able to look. And so they created the intelligence committees of the Congress that could see what nobody else in the Congress could see. And it'd be 8 or 10 people, and they would oversee these intelligence services. Well, in the Justice Department, Mr. Strzok and these folks were able to operate outside the judicial standards, where you had to prove to the Assistant Attorney General and these other folks that if you're going to prosecute someone, they could put their own little game together, and they decided that they hated Donald Trump, and they didn't care how people voted. And so what they were going to do was create an artificial scenario that they could say, well, he conspired with an enemy. And so they made it all up, and they made all these studies, and then they were able to appoint a special prosecutor that hired all of them. The same people, Mr. Strzok, the guy that invented talking to his girlfriend, we now have the tweets back and forth, who went over to Mike Flynn, the National Security Advisor at the White House when Mr. Trump went in, and he's moving his boxes around his office. Now, he has been the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Right, I know General Flynn.
He knew more than anybody.
He's a great guy.
And he worked with the FBI, who's responsible for this. And so this FBI agent walks in, he said, how are you? Good to see you in there. And he's just getting situated. Mr. Strzok then took that interview, that encounter, called it an interview and said he lied to him, and then began to harass him until finally his defense costs were so great he had to sell his house and everything else.
This is politicization of the intelligence.
And so he surrendered. So when people say, well, MSNBC and these folks say, well, there were all of these indictments. There wasn't one indictment. Let me say it again. There was not one single indictment. How many? 0 on any collusion. All they were able to do was to harass people to the point that they said, well, what you said on Thursday is different from what you said 2.5 years ago. Therefore, you lied, and I'm going to harass you until you agree to it. And so there's 4 or 5 examples of where they said that they lied in order just to get them off their back. But the purpose of the investigation of the Mueller report was, did the Trump campaign conspire with the Russians to throw the election? And the answer to that is not one time.
No.
And that means that when they opened the investigation, when Mr. Mueller sat down with these crooks at the FBI and said, all right, show me what you got, that meant they had nothing on day one. And they've run this thing all the way through the last election with them all talking about it. He should have shut this down months and months and months ago. But he wanted to get through the last election so Democrats could get control of the House. And once he's done that, now the jig is up. The fact is they've got nothing. And
the report's coming out, though. They're going to dig through that and find what?
Every slimy attack thing is, he arrogantly did this, and he without.
He looked at me funny.
That's right. And their hatred will be full of venomous 400 words of attack on personality and action, because they're frustrated and mad because the American people won.
It's all political. But the bottom line is, there was no collusion.
End of story.
That's
and it's evil that went on in our country. It is the greatest attempt of the inside state to have a coup d'etat in the history of the United States.